Hello everyone, welcome back to the Rainbow Sketchbook series. Today's page is a black piece of construction paper. My goals for this page are to utilize the page color more in the final piece than I did last time, to use colored pencil throughout the piece instead of as a final touch, and to create a slightly more polished piece without ruining the fun of working in a sketchbook. After finishing the last piece, I saw that the next page was black and immediately started thinking about what to draw. Initially, I wanted to do a human portrait, working with an abstraction of colors and leaving the page to really breathe and be the star of the piece. However, by the time I started actually working on the piece, my mind had moved on to sheep. Thinking about sheep and rainbows led me to think about dreams, which always brings Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep to mind. I'm super into philosophy, and it is apparently a reading that has stuck with me since college. Anyhow, with those trains of thought in mind, I began working past just the sheep and rainbow to more neon, psychedelic dream imagery. Oddly enough, more inspiration came for this piece from 70s manga, which I cannot get enough of lately. This influenced the shape of the sheep's body and head, as well as those super long eyelashes. I then began playing around with how I wanted to execute this rainbow palette. I tend to work with a more limited palette, so having literally every color at my disposal was a little uncomfortable. The test was worth it though, because it is where I came up with the idea to do the rim lighting on the sheep. It gave the piece more of that neon electric feel that I was inspired by. That said, I think the rim light would have worked better in the reverse. This didn't occur to me until after I colored in the clouds, which involved a lot of reversing of the rainbow inside of them. After gaining confidence with using the rainbow palette for the piece, I reevaluated my value composition one last time and decided having a white center wouldn't work very well with the black page. While the sheep's wool is still white, it is far more muted than it would have been originally. Doing this final check prevented me from ever putting down too much Posca on the wool, probably saving this piece. Finally, wrapping up the idea generation and thumbnailing phase, it was time to lay in the sketch. I transferred the sketch over freehand, as I didn't think it would show through the black paper on my light table. I made sure to keep checking that the star of the piece was in the center and taking up as much space as I wanted it to. The lay-in went really well, so I didn't have to make many corrections. I then started to work with the Posca. It was surprisingly thin on this paper, though I think a lot of it was absorbed. I had to go over the rainbow 2 or 3 times with each color to get the finish I wanted. Despite only having medium-tipped pens to work with, I was able to easily line most of the sheep, except for the feet. I lost a little detail with them, but don't think it's very noticeable in the final. I was going to use Posca on the eyelashes as well, but they were too thick for that, so I wiped the red off and later used colored pencil for them. I continued working in a similar fashion for the rest of the piece, filling in the section of rainbow and outlining the sheep. I then moved on to working in colored pencil for the clouds. I was only going to put shapes inside of them, but then the idea struck me to fill them in with rainbow. I slowly built the color up in them, blending as I went along. When I came to the second section of clouds, I made the decision to reverse the order of the rainbow. This was probably my best idea in this piece, as it creates a lot of fun movement throughout. I then went in with white Posca to add the sheep's wool. I used 2 layers, one for a base coat and one more to carve out folds in the wool. I made sure that a lot of the texture came through to avoid having a white blob in the center of the page. To wrap things up, I very lightly bled the rainbow outline into the sheep with the colored pencils. I then added some bigger shapes inside of the clouds with the white Posca and went over them with a little colored pencil so they didn't stand out too much. I think the piece could use something more within the rainbow, but I'm not sure what it is, and also think it provides the eye a place to rest away from the busy clouds. Unfortunately, most of this process didn't make it. I was testing out using the computer program for my camera, which allowed me to see what I was filming on screen. This was great because I could see what it would look like as a final video, and prevented using a ton of battery from keeping the small screen of the camera on the whole time. However, it did not do one very important thing. It never notified me that the memory card had filled up. For whatever reason, I never emptied the card after my last filming session, so only a small amount of the process was captured and saved. I have since given up on the computer program until I can take time to learn about it, and have been downloading and removing video from the card after each session. This has worked well so far, so hopefully future catastrophe can be avoided. With all that said, I'm really proud of how this piece turned out, and think it'll make the cutest little prints. My favorite part was working on creating the rainbow clouds, so I'm pretty upset that you guys don't get the chance to see how they came together. But, do you know what you guys get in exchange for my blender? A whole other piece in this video. Not quite a BOGO, but discounted nonetheless. Jumping right into our second piece of this video, and the third page of our sketchbook, we have another piece of pink cardstock. The pink of the paper reminded me of hippos, so that is what I drew. The Cincinnati Zoo has had a couple hippo baby births these past few years, so I guess they were on my mind. That said, hippos aren't really anywhere near pink, they're much more of a purple color, so I'm not sure where that association comes from. My only goal for this piece was to actually record the entirety of it. I'll be the first to admit that the lost footage from the sheep piece really affected this one. I was still pretty upset about losing the footage, not just because the documentation of my process was gone forever, but because I needed to get started on this video. I went from being several days ahead of schedule to suddenly behind again. Losing that footage has once again got me rushing through my plans at the end of the month. Enough about that though, it's time to move on. As I said, I was thinking about those cute hippo babies at the zoo, so I knew I wanted to draw a mother with her calf. My first thumbnail is of them swimming with one another. This idea was booted pretty quickly since I remembered hippos don't exactly swim, they tend to buoyantly walk along the river bottom. So my next attempt was of the baby sitting on the mother's back. Looking back now, I think I would choose this thumbnail instead of the next one. Its silhouette is much clearer, and the overall concept is a little more fun. I think I chose the other one because at the time I wanted a little more direct interaction between the two hippos. This makes me think that for future pieces, even for the sketchbook, that I should do my thumbnails and then come back a little bit later before making that final choice. The final thumbnail, which I went with, is of the mother walking along the river bottom with the baby floating alongside of her. I like the idea because it comes across as a sweet moment between the two, but the silhouette is super confused. As you will see later, this causes me a ton of problems when I start coloring them in. After I chose my composition, I began nailing down how I wanted to draw these two, like I did with the sheep. The first pass at the head was too long, so I shortened it for a cuter look. I noticed here that I used the same shorthand for animal legs regardless of the kind of animal I'm drawing. So that is something I need to keep in mind and pay attention to. Next up was a very small palette test. Honestly, elaborating here would have saved me a ton of manic scrambling later on, but it is what it is. I had it in my head to try an Impressionism-inspired palette, but wasn't sure how to pull it off with the tools I have. The Impressionists used a lot of complementary colors for contrast, as well as exaggerated hues to achieve the effect they wanted. I realized pretty early on that I didn't know enough about those palettes or Posca pens yet to attempt it. After feeling satisfied with my idea generation, it was time to lay in the sketch in the sketchbook. In this step, I resolved the proportion issues I was having in the thumbing and stylizing phase. However, the hippo could have been a bit more vertically centered, as well as a tad bit bigger. This resulted in a lot of dead space at the bottom of the page. In good news though, the gesture of the baby increased, which led to the appearance of more dynamic action. Looking back, I wish I added something bigger in the foreground. I do have some greenery down there, but it is a large static space that could have used more work in the idea phase. Wrapping up my lay-in, I gave the hippo some cute little tails. And now, it's finally time for some color. I started with my Posca pens to lay in large color areas such as the riverbed and water. I wanted the pink of the paper to show through the hippo, so not using Posca there made sense. I really wanted to use a green for the water to go along with my idea of using an Impressionist palette. However, I didn't have the proper greens, one being too bright and the other too dark, both of which were too saturated. In this line of thought, the same would then have worked better as a gray-blue, but I also didn't have that color. I did mix a little of the light blue and gray though for the sky, while the gray was still wet. Taking another look, I decided to add some dark blue in back of the hippos to help push them off the page. Having finished with the Posca pens, it was time to break out the colored pencils. It took a lot of work in fudging things before the colored pencil came together. A big reason for this is I think I just didn't understand how to construct the hippo very well. I was originally aiming for something more cartoony style like the sheep. I wound up using a lot of references though and tightened the proportions up too much. I do this kind of flip-flopping in my work a lot. I think spending more time doing preliminary work can fix it, since that way I know for sure what size, style, and the basics of conveying the subject would be. After putting down some purple, I tried to erase some construction lines and picked up the colored pencil unexpectedly. When I say I'm new to using colored pencil, I mean it. I ended up losing a lot of the baby sketch, which led to some confusion when coloring it. Around this point, I start freaking out over the hippos blending into one another. I tried to push the baby out towards the viewer by throwing more of those dark purples behind of it. All I accomplished, though, was limiting the success of my later and better solution. Here I thought that going back in with white would help separate them as well. However, to no one else's surprise, it just blended the colors underneath. I've decided that I need to treat colored pencil more like watercolor, and that I should work light to dark with them. After consulting various reference images, I began to notice where the muscle and fat should be. This helped me to push my dark values in places where they should actually be. I then realized just how reflective hippos are. They're super reflective, by the way. This also means that putting down so much purple early on was detrimental to the overall piece. If I were to redo this piece, I would leave the reflective areas as the page color underneath, with some white for pop, and push the area beneath it darker. In my opinion, this is the low point of the piece, which means this is where it starts to turn around. I began my redemption arc by sculpting the mother hippo more. I enjoy cute art and try to make it, but love rendering things to death and back. By continuing to push forward with cute pieces, I hope to become more comfortable with leaving less defined pieces as they are. At first, I was disappointed with the bright blue on the baby. Looking at it now, I think that is what finally separated it from the mother, especially since the magenta is right next to it. There are a ton of pink and red pages in the sketchbook. It would be really cool to revisit these hippos with the second thumbnail of the baby standing on the mother after I get comfortable with these mediums. Though maybe it would make more sense to use a purple page if I have one. I guess that won't be as much of a recreation if I switch page colors. While I tried to avoid outlining things when working with traditional media, it was super necessary here to get that last bit of separation. I wouldn't have had to work so hard separating them if I would have focused more on a clear silhouette early on. I'm still not sure about the addition of brown here. Some of it I do believe was needed, but I gave the mother this weird pouch and broke up the harmony of the prior palette. It is a warm brown, but the colors used before were largely cool hues. I was surprised by how much tooth was left after putting the Posca down. That tooth allowed me to go over those sections with colored pencil to create unity through texture and add more visual interest. It was at this point where I realized how bare that bottom third of the page was. I think I may go back and add greenery with the dark green Posca pen to utilize that space more and create a foreground. I looked up some African river fish for the ones I had penciled into the background. I have no clue if these guys inhabit the same area, but thought it was better than throwing some truly random fish in there. I enjoyed adding the bands of color to the water. It makes it feel lively while creating cohesion between the light and dark blue Posca paints. For some final touches, I went back in with white Posca over top of the water to create the feeling of foam and light reflection. I then added some more hints of greenery to the river bottom. It's a little more lively, but still pretty lacking. I tried to add the eye whites with colored pencil, but as I already discovered, white colored pencil doesn't really work that way. I tried to pick up some paint off of the white Posca pen and put it down with the colored pencil. Astonishingly, that doesn't work either. I then switched to everyone's favorite Sakura Jelly Roll pen, which for once does work. I also used this jelly pen for the final highlights on the hippo bodies. Since it doesn't dry immediately, I was able to smudge it some. This helped me avoid harsh white outlines on the reflective areas of the hippo skin. I hope you enjoyed being able to watch the entire process for this piece. I think between the two pieces, I did accomplish my goals. For the sheep, that was utilizing the color of the page, using colored pencil throughout, and creating a more polished piece while still having fun. For this hippo piece, that was just recording and saving all of it, which since you just watched it, I'd say was pretty successful. My goal for next time is when using colored pencil to do so light to dark. Until then, you can catch me over on my coffee and other socials at Les Riot. Take care!